So I'm sorry you've got the B team today. Pastor Steve couldn't make it. I'm actually giving a talk a little bit off the top of my head from one I've given before. And that is a great prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel 70 weeks. It's actually only got 4 verses, but you'll notice by the time I finish how long I can stretch 4 verses out. They're very big verses and they're full of information. This particular prophecy, Daniel chapter 9, and we're starting there in verse 24, is very historic for those who don't know in our fellowship. Our fellowship mostly would not exist if it wasn't the fact that 2 men came together to discuss this very prophecy. And the 2 men were Tom Foster and Leo Harris. And they came from 2 different backgrounds. Tom Foster was Presbyterian, but he got into what's called the historic interpretation of Bible prophecy, or the common name is BI, British Israel. And he wasn't spirit-filled. He had been baptised, but he wasn't spirit-filled. The other man was Leo Harris, who was Pentecostal, as we would say today, from the Assemblies of God and other Pentecostal groups like the Apostolic Church. And they came from really 2 totally different backgrounds. It was the combination of those 2 beliefs that then became our fellowship. Most of Pentecost doesn't believe in the historic interpretation of Bible prophecy. They believe in doctrines like the secret rapture and so on, which we don't believe. And it's called futuristic, and we believe historic. So what we mean by historic is you grab books like the book of Daniel, as we're doing today, and the book of Revelation, and you put them alongside your history book, and you just see all the great events of history has already been prophesied by God, and the 2 match up. And we come towards the end of the book of Revelation and realise there's not much left to match up. And so anyhow, these 2 men came together. It was on the 30th of November 1941, and Leo Harris was running a little Assemblies of God church in Ballarat, and Tom Foster, who lived in Melbourne, had come up to Ballarat to give they called it a lecture. There wasn't a preaching, and it wasn't actually a church. The British Israel was just more a belief, and he was a lecturer of historic interpretation of Bible prophecy. And Leo Harris was boarding with a lady called Miss Finlayson, who must have been unusual because she was in the Assemblies of God and spirit-filled, but she believed in the historic interpretation. And she invited Leo Harris along, and I won't go through all of that. We'll just say that these 2 men came together on that day. Leo Harris went and listened to the lecture, and then later that night, Tom Foster went to the little Assemblies of God meeting and made an arrangement to meet next morning at Miss Finlayson's house where Leo was boarding. He was only 21 at the time, and Tom was in his early 30s. And they came together, and Tom had already nailed Leo down. He said, I want to talk to you about British Israel. And Leo said, I don't want to talk about that at all. I don't even believe it at all. And I think it was of the Lord that led Tom to talk about this prophecy. Because for those who know the story all about the children of Israel immigrating across Europe to England, it's another whole story. I reckon they would have got bogged down and disagreed on different things. But what Tom Foster said to Leo, he said, look, I'll just discuss one prophecy with you, and if we get somewhere, we'll get somewhere. If we don't, we'll forget it. And he said, I want to prove to you that a prophecy that Pentecost uses for the second coming of the Lord, the secret rapture and all that, I want to prove to you it's got nothing to do with the second coming of Jesus Christ and everything to do with the first coming of Jesus Christ, which it is. So that's how they sat down, and this is the prophecy that Tom chose and that they went through. Leo had even written a pamphlet supporting the secret rapture and all that, and used this the other way. So it was sort of fighting against his own belief and fighting against his own thoughts, but praise the Lord, by the end of that day, it had prevailed. So let's go through it. Daniel 70. I think to me, it's one of the most amazing and definite, detailed prophecies And the only word that's not in there, and yet it's in every verse, is the name Jesus. I think of the hymn we just sang a minute ago. I love to tell the story, or words, that's another one. It's the same thing though. The story of Jesus. And that's what this is all about. So 70 weeks, pretty easy to work that out. That a week has got 7 days in it. So 70 times 7 is 490. And we know in the Bible that a day is a year. So we're actually talking 490 years. Are determined, it details who it's determined on. First of all, the children of Israel themselves, and then upon the actual city, not on the land of Israel. The people and the city are defined. Upon the people, which of course is the children of Israel, and then the holy city is Jerusalem, not Rome. To finish the transgression. Now, it goes through these amazing things that's going to be achieved by this prophecy. There's 7 here. It looks like when you first read there's only 6, but there's actually 7 points, which we know is such a big Bible number. When I read through this, we're going to do this in a second, and we think of that wonderful prophecy in Isaiah chapter 9. It goes through the list of all the names. His name shall be Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. It goes through all that wonderful, beautiful list of all the things that Jesus was and is. And this is a bit like that. It goes through 7 things that was achieved through this prophecy. And each one you could spend half an hour on, but I won't. Number 1, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So it's a very comprehensive list of things that were going to be achieved. And we know Jesus, when we go to the life of Jesus, particularly the crucifixion, resurrection, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, all of those things was accomplished by him and by nobody else. And as I said, it looks like there's 6 points there, but one of them divides into 2, and that is to seal up the vision, separate to sealing up the prophecy. They're in the one verse, so you put those 2, you end up with 7 amazing and mighty things that Jesus did. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked basically his Father, is there some other way that this could be achieved? Is what he's really saying. Do I have to drink this cup of death as he was? And there was no answer, which meant, yes, you're going to have to go through it. So Jesus accomplished all the things there. So then it gives a timetable. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, we'll stop it right there. Somewhere there is the going forth of a commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. Now, this prophecy deals at the time of the Persian Empire, earlier in this chapter and so on. Details the Persian Empire, which they were under at that time. And actually gone a little bit into this prophecy when this prophecy was given to Daniel. It was already in it a little bit in the fact that 539 BC, Cyrus the Great had conquered Babylon. It was the end of the Babylonian kingdom in 539 BC. A little digression for a second. The Babylonian kingdom started in 609 BC when Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, defeated the last of the Assyrians. That's when the Babylonian kingdom started. It only went for 70 years to 539 BC. I just thought the other day about our Queen. Our Queen has reigned now for 70 years, the whole history of the Babylonian kingdom, which was a short kingdom, but the Second World War, I digress again, was even shorter. The Third Reich was supposed to last for 1,000 years. It lasted for 11 years. That's even shorter. Nothing to do with this. So the going forth of the commandment. Now we find out there are 3 decrees from the Persian emperors, kings. There was the decree of Cyrus the Great, which you can read about in early Ezra. The book of Ezra records how Cyrus said, God has spoken to me. He wants to get some of you people to go back and rebuild the temple. Not the city at the time, just the temple. And then that started off, and about 537, 2 years after he came to power, or the whole kingdom, he was already in power, but it conquered the whole thing. He then sent people down. There was a guy called Zerubbabel, and he was a descendant of King David, but he wasn't a king. He was a governor. Zedekiah was the last king, and Jeshua was the high priest, and they went down with some of the children of Israel back from Babylon, which was now Persia, and they decided to start building the temple. So the first decree is the decree of Cyrus the Great in about 537 BC. And as you read the book there, how they got very excited and they laid the foundation, and when they finished the foundation, got rid of all the rubble from the destroyed temple by the Babylonians, and been in ruins a couple of decades there, 2 or 3 decades. 586 it was destroyed. And we find there that they came down and they laid the foundation, and they all got very excited. And you might know the verse where it says that the people that lived right back to the first temple, Solomon's temple, remembered that, and they wept over the whole situation. And the young people who had not been there, they rejoiced over the new foundation, the new future. It says that the weeping and the rejoicing got all mixed together. It was a great sound I could hear for miles around, how they rejoiced over the laying of the foundation. But guess what? They all went home and forgot about to build the temple. So that wasn't right through until 522 BC, 537 down to 522, that 2 great prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, were called by the Lord to stir the people up. You mostly know the scriptures. We said, consider your ways. You know, you've gone home and you built your own house, but this still lies waste. And I would imagine picturing the foundations, all the grass had grown up through the foundation. There they've been lying there for years. And so the next decree was through when there was an appeal made to see if they had the support of the king, Darius, the great as he was, and he supported Cyrus, should I say, and they got going against those 2 decrees there, about 537, 522, and later on they got together. It took them another 6 years to finish the temple, and took 7 years all told, 1 year to start off with, and then a gap, then another 6 years, they built the temple, and Solomon's temple also was 7 years in building. It's interesting that the church later on, which is the temple, took 7 years, 3.5 and 3.5, which is part of this prophecy. None of these things have happened by chance. So we've gone through 2 decrees, 539 decree of Cyrus, and then the decree of Darius the Great. And then we jump right down to the 3rd decree, which is the one that this is talking about. And we know that because in the very same verse, it sort of gives you a hint which out of the 3 decrees it is. And that is the decree of Artaxerxes in the time of Nehemiah, quite a few decades later, in 457 BC. And they'd finished the temple, and people went on living around it, but the city was still in ruins. And then you know the story of Nehemiah, quite a few decades later, when he went sad before the king, Artaxerxes. By the way, Artaxerxes means son of Xerxes. The previous emperor was Xerxes. This is Artaxerxes. I want you to remember all these facts. It's called trivia. Anyhow, we know there that Nehemiah went in front of, he was the cupbearer. He drank the wine first to see that he didn't die, that the king didn't get poisoned. Didn't matter if he got poisoned, as long as the king didn't get poisoned. And he looked sad, and the king said to him, what's wrong? You're not normally sad. And we know through the whole story of how he said, I've heard that the city lies in ruins. I'd like to go back and rebuild all the houses, clear all the streets out, and rebuild the wall. The temple's sitting there, nothing had happened. So there's a 3rd decree that went out in 457 BC. It's a very pivotal date in this prophecy, because it starts from that date. We'll read verse 25 again. Knowing therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore. So we might put in the word straight away, from 457 BC to build Jerusalem under the decree was that, not the temple, that was already built. to restore the rest of the city. Unto Messiah, now there's no doubt who we're talking about here, the prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So all of a sudden it grabs this 70 weeks and starts to divide it up. First of all, there'll be just 7 weeks, then there'll be a whole 62 weeks, that goes to 69 weeks, and then there's going to be 1 week left at the end of it, making up 70 weeks. So, I'll go back. Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and then 62 weeks, or 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the wall in troublous times. So that is the hint to which decree it's talking about, because that's what happened. Nehemiah cleared up the city and he rebuilt the wall. So the other 2 decrees, there's no confusion there. This is the decree we're talking about. And then it says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. So, big gap. So what happened in that time? First of all, the 49 years, the 7 weeks, the little bit it grabs at the beginning, went from the when they finally Nehemiah started on the temple, and then so not the temple, the wall and the streets. It took him 49 years to do it. And we go through to 408 BC, from 457 BC, 49 or 7 weeks to 408 BC is divided up to let you know that's an important part of this. They're going to rebuild, and it says in troublous times at the end of verse 25. And when you read the book of Nehemiah, it was in troublous times. They all opposed him. You know, Sanballat and Tobiah and all these guys that were there tried to stop Nehemiah, and he had to do it. He had a sword in one hand if you were right-handed, and a trowel in your left hand if you were left-handed. I can't remember. And you sort of had to try and build and protect yourself. So that took 49 years, or 7 weeks. So we're down to the 62 plus the 1 week now. So that just leaves 62 weeks as a big bit in the middle of this prophecy, with nothing particular happening. So that started living there, people came pouring back in. And when you think about it, when Jesus Christ came to the earth, he didn't want to come back to a city in ruins. He wanted to come back to all the streets strewn and the walls broken down. By the time Jesus came, 400 years later, we find there that the city had restored, 50,000 Jews had come back, and everything had got going again. It was not quite the same, of course, because the 10 tribes had gone. It was down to just the house of Judah and Benjamin. And a lot of the northern part of the kingdom was where the Samaritans had been brought in by the Assyrians. But it settled down to that. Now, kingdoms came and went. So the Persian Empire was then conquered by the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, and a Greek. And that went for a while. And then the Roman Empire came in. All that happened in that 62 weeks. So by the time we get to the last week, we've got the Roman Empire very much in power over this land of Israel and so on, plus the whole Mediterranean world. So after 62 weeks, verse 26 again, shall Messiah be cut off. We know the story, don't we? We've read the end of the book, how he died on the cross for us. But not for himself. A great little statement in the middle. He didn't die because he'd done anything wrong. He died for us. So it makes that little point there. And the people of the prince. Now, we've got a couple of princes here. We've got a prince back there in verse 25 with a capital P. Messiah the prince is talking very much about Jesus. But now we're talking about another prince without a capital P. It's talking about the emperor in Rome. So there's another empire that's involved here. The people of the prince, or the Romans, that shall come. So they came from somewhere else. They didn't normally live there. They moved in and taken over. Shall come and, starting in the prince shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. When you think about the two things that they'd gone all that trouble to restore, 500 odd years later, they're going to be all destroyed again. And this time, though, by the Romans. So the prince of the people there that came and did that. So again, you just get your history book out. You put it alongside all of it, it all matches up. So did this happen like it prophesied? Yes, it did happen exactly as it prophesied. I'll start again, or not start again. They shall come in middle of verse 26 and destroy the city and the sanctuary. By the way, that jumps beyond the 70 weeks prophecy. It jumps through to 70 AD. This prophecy actually ended in 34 BC. I'll give you some dates in a minute. So another 36 years later, in 70 AD, the city again, the temple was destroyed, and the walls were all broken down again. So that was destroyed. And it prophesied that would happen there. And the people of the prince shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, 70 AD, and thereof will be with a flood. Well, it was not what was known as the diaspora, or the dispersion of the Jews. When they finally were sent, everybody was sent away from Palestine. It was totally, not just the destruction of the land and that, the people, the ones that survived, were scattered abroad. Whereas under the Babylonian kingdom, they were taking the two tribes just up the road to Babylon, came back. This time, no, you're going throughout all the nations of the earth, as it prophesies in other parts of the Bible. So it will be with a flood, be an overflowing flood of these people. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. The word determined there appears 3 times in this prophecy. And the first time it says determined there, back there in verse 25, was it? Where was the word determined?
Verse 24.
Verse 24, back there. That word determined means, maybe the way we use the word determined, it's something set in motion and it's going to happen. It was determined that this was going to happen. But the word determined appears twice more, and that means a total annihilation. Same word in our English, 2 totally different words in the Hebrew come in to determine each time. So when it says they would be determined at the end of verse 26, this will be an utter destruction. Trying to think what the Hebrew word, I've got it written down on my other talk, which I haven't got with me. I think the Hebrew word, somebody wants to look it up on while I'm talking. I think it means, comes from a Hebrew word, hazard, Hazad, like we have the word hazard, but it means to utterly destroy. Anyhow, keep going, Jock. Right, we've got through 3 of the verses. We're now down to verse 27. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. We've gone the 7 weeks, we've got the 62 weeks, we've got 1 week left. He's going to confirm the covenant over a 7-year period. And you'd think that would cover the ministry of Christ, but only half of it is the ministry of Christ, and the other half is the establishment of the church. So he'll determine it for 1 week or 7 years, and in the midst of the week, or 3.5 years, 3.5 prophetic days, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Now we know that Jesus' ministry went for 3.5 years. The Bible is very clear on that he came when he was about 30. Now one thing that's a little bit different on the dates is that, which is always a little bit confusing, that Jesus was actually born about 3 or 4 years before he was born, according to the calendar. So when you put together the 69 weeks, the 7 and the 62, you come through to 27 AD. 27 AD, and then you've got the start of the last week, which would go through to 34 AD, the next 7 years. But what the Bible seems to does indicate that he was 30 years old when he started. So why do we go to 27 AD? The reason we do is that we know that Herod the Great tried to kill Jesus when he butchered all the little boys after the wise men had directed them. And we know that he died 4 BC. So Jesus had to be alive 4 BC. He was born 4 BC. We end up with 27 AD instead of 30 AD. And so we date this last 7 days or 7 years from 27 AD. And we, in the middle of it, we come to 30 AD. And Jesus dying in the midst of 30 AD. He sat up on the Mount of Olives, overlooking the temple, a couple of hours, mostly a few days before he was crucified, only days anyhow before he was crucified. And we know it's all in Matthew 24, and the disciples said, look at the temple, and Jesus said, there's going to come a time when not one stone will be left upon another. So at 30 AD, he prophesied a 40-year prophecy to 70 AD. 40, big number in the Bible. 40 years later, sure enough, Jerusalem was destroyed. You know, when Jesus was carrying his cross, and it talks about the women weeping, and he said, don't weep for me, you weep for yourself. Because he was talking about 40 years down the track, you're all going to be in big trouble. The Romans are going to come down, they're going to smash the city up. Many of you are going to die. Many of you are going to die of starvation, let alone die by the sword. And what's left is going to be taken away. A lot of the Jews, by the way, were then taken back to Rome, just as a side digression, and they built the Colosseum. Jewish slaves built the Colosseum. The Colosseum was built at the time of Vespasian and his son Titus, who was the emperor later he became emperor too, who destroyed Jerusalem. So that's the time it's talking about. In the midst of the week, Jesus dies on the cross in 30 AD. We'll read verse 27 again. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation seat. No longer, because Jesus became the sacrifice. No longer did you need the Old Testament sacrifice done by the priest and the high priest. That's all gone. It's funny how the Jews went on doing it though. You know, the veil of the temple, as we know, was rent in twain, saying that's all over. They must have sewed it back together again to keep the Jewish faith going. By the way, whenever I read this, I think, what do the Jews do with this prophecy? It's got a clear beginning, at the beginning of the command. They know the history. They can find 457 BC, add 490. If it's not Jesus, it had to be somebody else. It only goes for 490 years. What do they do with it? Maybe they explain things away like they do. So, and then he says, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of the abomination, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that word determined again means to utterly destroy, shall be poured upon the desolate. And it became a desolate land. They all went. They were taken. God gave up on them. He warned them many, many, many times. And they saw what happened to the 10 tribes when they became idol worshippers. And the Lord used that a lot of times. You read through Hosea. Look what happened to the 10 tribes. And yet you're doing exactly the same thing. You know, the same thing's going to happen to you. So why do we go to 30? Well, we've got to go to 34 AD if we're going to go for the whole 70 weeks. But what happened in 34 AD? There's a little bit of discussion on that because none of us know exactly what happened. So I'll call it the old belief, is that the end of the 34 years was the stoning of Stephen. By the way, we're going to at least 3.5 years into the church. The confirmation of the church, 3.5 years, ministry of Christ, 3.5 years from Pentecost. And then the church is fully established and the whole prophecy is over. So we're trying to guess what happened in 34 AD. Well, I don't go quite with the Stephen idea. I don't mind that. I love the story of Stephen because there's nowhere near how you can get 3.5 years from the day of Pentecost and the crucifixion just before it to 3.5 years to Stephen. It's maybe even within the first year. When you read through the first couple of chapters of the book of Acts, all the persecution in Jerusalem, and then the beginning of chapter 6, where we have the first mention of Stephen and the other 6, they became deacons, didn't they, to serve tables. Peter said, look, we're busy preaching the gospel. There's a problem here between the Grecians and the Jewish people, and we're going to get 7 guys to look after it. You haven't got 3.5 years in that time. I would guess it's still within the first year that all happened. And then 2 of those deacons were very naughty because they didn't go on being deacons. They both became incredible evangelists. One was Stephen and the other was Philip. Both of them were deacons, supposed to be looking after the table, and they went off and preached the gospel. What hope have we got here? So my thought on the 34 AD is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon the Gentiles, which to me would make sense that the completion of this great prophecy was when all the world can be saved. So they're holding off on thinking salvation's only for the Jews, and then the Lord got involved with Cornelius, and as I said, somewhere around that time would have been the case when Cornelius got saved. So whether I'm right or whether, it doesn't matter, we know that it covers another 3.5 years beyond the crucifixion, beyond Pentecost, to the establishment of the church. So that, as I said, is one of the greatest prophecies in the Bible about, in detail, and dates and everything to do with the coming of Jesus. By mid-afternoon, Leo Harris succumbed. They started at morning tea. Tom Foster said, let's discuss this prophecy. Leo said that he put up as big a fight as he could. By mid-afternoon, he realised it could not... We've all just been through it. Has it got anything to do with the second coming of Christ? Nothing at all. Detailed dates, everything to do with the first coming of Christ. And I won't go try to explain the doctrine of the secret rapture. Why have they got that doctrine? Because it came from the Catholic Church, who came up with an alternative to people like Martin Luther saying that the Catholic Church was the beast. They came up with an alternative, and unfortunately, the world of Christianity has adopted it. The old devil will be very happy with that. It's a false doctrine that's got out there that many people, unfortunately, have gone down to. So we're going to finish off in Matthew, chapter 18. So without going back over those wonderful things that was accomplished at the beginning of the prophecy, get rid of transgression, sort out sin, everlasting righteousness, all the wonderful things, to anoint the most holy and so on. I dare say the main message in that 70 weeks is salvation for mankind. Everlasting salvation. One of those was one of the points. Everlasting, removal of transgression, removal of sin. And it just so happens that this little story here links up with the prophecy we just read. And it's in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 21. And then came Peter to him, to Jesus, and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Till 7 times. I think Peter was, and I think we can see it from Peter's point of view, that's stretching things. I mean, if somebody comes offending you and you forgive them, you forgive them, you forgive them, you forgive them. I mean, up to 7, that's being very generous to whatever this person is doing. You know, he's thinking, surely, you know, am I being magnanimous here, whatever the word is? And Jesus said unto him, 70 weeks prophecy is another way of putting this. Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Meaning 490 again. Meaning there's no... By the way, you don't get to 491 and say, now I don't have to forgive him. The message is everlasting forgiveness, total forgiveness. Christianity covers everything. And so, as I said, it's an amazing prophecy, beautifully accurate, dates that can't be altered. They're all historic dates that nobody can alter. And he's brought in this wonderful salvation for us. And all the people said, Amen.